instigators, troublemakers, and so on. This is a very This has been a consistent theme of China's politics for a long time. But on the other hand, we live in Hong Kong, right? Because one of the reasons we live here is because it is a place, a territory, an administrative region that permits freedom of expression, and that's one of the things that makes Hong Kong such a a wonderful place. And so I think the challenge for everybody who lives in Hong Kong, especially you citizens of Hong Kong, but also everybody else, is how do you deal with a situation in which some of the values that we hold dear, living in an open, democratically oriented society with political liberties and protections and so on, how do you encourage that sort of, how do you promote that kind of social order? And people of all different backgrounds got upset when you see that slipping away, right? And so the message from me personally, and I think a lot of colleagues, is that we're professional researchers, teachers. We're happy to contribute what we know to the movement. We don't have any magic answers. We also have a lot of limitations. Not only do we not live here, but most of us, even though, for example, we know Hong Kong quite well, we might be limited in our ability to communicate. We don't speak Gongdonghua, Cantonese, right? We can only, engage to a certain degree. And, this is not our struggle, but we are human beings just like you. And, our job is, as professionals, is essentially to try to help you to understand and explain the world. And our job as sort of public intellectuals is to talk to young people, when they have questions. If there were some people who came in here with blue ribbons and they disagreed with you guys, I'd be happy to talk with them. I might have different views, and I might have a different kind of discussion with them. But we're here to, we're in Hong Kong as professionals, as public intellectuals, and of course as individuals. And so when we see young people who want to talk about ideas, we say, that's our job, and we're happy to help you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I'd like to ask the question on the use of media. Just now, Dr. London, you talked about the framing of the whole movement and said that it was a competition between different parties. So apparently, when you turn on TVB, the government is trying to frame the movement as a very disorganized and a movement filled with conflicts and different opinions. But if you are really at the scene, you may have a different feeling. So I'd like to ask, what's your view towards such kind of media war, especially when you may have personally received WhatsApp that may tell you news of different spots, while that may or may not be real?
Yeah, this is a problem that exists in virtually every society. It manifests in different ways. You have to remember that media, news media, consist of organizations, and these organizations have different interests. What kind of coverage do you think that you're getting on CCTV, right? And what kind of coverage are you getting in the South China Morning Post? The South China Morning Post is a very, well-respected international newspaper, but it, has its own particular take on things too. And some people would argue that within the last 3 years, even that newspaper has changed in its sort of editorial outlook, its editorial content. And so, yes, absolutely, all social movements confront this challenge. How are they depicted? The world is incredibly impressed with this social movement because you're so well behaved. I can tell you right now, it's difficult to imagine young people, for example, in the United States, conducting themselves in such an orderly in a responsible manner. That's very impressive, and that's won you a great deal of respect around the world. So now, yes, media organizations are framing, they're massaging, they're spinning. So this morning when, the Hong Kong government made statements, they tried very much to characterize this as about, disillusioned, well-intentioned young people who are misguided, and we'll talk with you. And that's a kind of patronizing attitude. What about business? Newspapers. The SCMP business section is quite interesting to watch. For example, I'm an English speaker, so I can't. And I know that in China, in Hong Kong, you have, of course, Ming Pao, Apple Daily, et cetera, with, they all have different interests and views. And so, in a way, it's an impossible task, but certainly, I think the key probably is that you cannot sit back and be passively characterized, right? Because people will paint the picture they want to paint. You are perfectly, respectable young people are doing something, but somebody could paint an extremely, ugly picture and make you look evil and paint you with green faces and all these things, right? And so, the key is to seize the narrative and to, but you need to articulate ideas. I have to say, very frequently it's been the case, and, I'm sure the language issues are part of it, but you guys need to, I would say this to any social movement, I suppose. If you want to communicate effectively, you need to be able to, put a few sentences together and to give a convincing explanation. And sometimes even, very experienced politicians have trouble with this. For example, in the United States, a person says, I'm going to run for president. A reporter comes up to them and says, why do you want to run for president? Okay, if they stumble, if they have no response to that immediately, they have no chance, right? So it's sort of, the same for you. If you don't have a coherent response to why you're there, it cannot be, because that's my friends are there, so I'm following them. There has to be a clear message. And so, communication is vitally important. It's no accident that, governments, for example, the Chinese government invests vast amounts of money in media. They have news channels all over the world. They are, trying to communicate a certain message. It's a competition for minds. It's a very old saying, but it, in some senses, is true. And so, I think, there are challenges. It's difficult if you're just everybody's focusing on one teenager like Joshua Wong standing on a stepladder shouting through a microphone. That can excite a crowd, but there needs to be a clearer message. And so, effective social movements, for example, the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, or the struggle for women's rights in various countries around the world. They've always had a clear message, and without that, you're not going to be able to win support. And here's the thing: the critical issue about social movements, the central challenge is, how do you convince people who are sympathetic but are bystanders to actually make sacrifices? This is the challenge that all social movements confront. And it's not easy, because there's something called the free rider problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know about that?
Yeah.
Which is that you can just sit on your bottom and wait for other people to do the fighting, and then you'll enjoy the benefits. And this is a very widely debated problem. But you confront it in Hong Kong, and you also face unique challenges with respect to how to avoid stagnation. For example, Occupy movements. Personally, when I first learned about Occupy Central, I thought it was not the brightest idea, because I'm basing my perspective on what happened in the U.S. and I found that these people, they occupied an area, and then they had now what, right? And in a sense, you face the same dilemma right now. And I think, that's something that people are struggling with.
On that, I think that's a really good point. But one of the interesting things I think that the Occupy movements elsewhere did do was they leveraged off the international attention they were getting around very strong narratives. The 1%, right? It was all about inequality and the gross sort of inequities you saw globally, and they had that element in, and they weren't just speaking to local audiences. They were aware that actually to have some sort of sustenance or to sustain the movement, they needed to bring in more supporters from outside as well as in local settings. Right now in Hong Kong, you have the whole world looking at you, but perhaps more could be done to sort of, pass the message on to those actors as well, right? Because they can be crucial in terms of allies in your agenda or in pursuing your agenda.
Actually, there's a one very there's been a quite interesting discussion about how China views all of this. I've already talked about how they view someone like me and how they view people like you, but one of the interesting things is that, going back to the significance of ideas, right, is about government, the role of government. And there's a very famous quotation, which is, in whose interest does the ruling class rule, right? And so, in whose interest does the ruling class rule? So, for example, the People's Republic of China was founded by a communist party that rose to power to rule, at least according to its intents, and in the interests of peasants and working people, right? And the point is not to turn this into a lecture on like Marxist thought, but the point is to ask the question, when you see the Hong Kong government, in whose interest are they governing Hong Kong? And of course, one of the central tensions in Hong Kong is that, Hong Kong people, like anybody else, they don't necessarily aren't searching for a Bentley automobile, but they would like to be able to live, comfortably with decent employment and things of this nature.